If you want to live well into the later years of your life, the number one most important consideration is strength. And this is where Tonal comes into play. For most people, if you go tell them, hey, go to the gym, lift at 60% of your 1RM max, they're going to look at you like, what are you talking about? All of the science behind the data that we collect, we can put that decision making and make that part of the automation process. My expectation as a consumer, I can walk up to it and talk to it, and this thing is going to talk back to me.
Jonathan Shottan is the Chief Product and Content Officer at Tonal, world's smartest home gym machine that has revolutionized fitness and strength training with digital weights, machine learning, and more.
There's never been a true fixed constraint. Yeah, maybe you can't spend more money, but that's a business decision. And yeah, maybe you can't hire more people, but that's a business decision. The reality is it created challenges for these companies. Not because the products weren't useful anymore, but because they overextended themselves.
If I gave you $100 to divide between strategy, execution, and leadership, how would you allocate it and why? Hello. Welcome to the Priyanka Shinde Podcast, where we dive into the art and science of strategy, execution, and leadership. I'm your host, Priyanka Shinde, author of The Art of Strategic Execution and a consultant for tech leaders. In this podcast, I bring you candid conversations with top executives, startup founders, and industry experts who are driving innovation, delivering results, and staying ahead in today's competitive landscape. We will break down what it takes to tap into founder mode and turn vision into action. If you are serious about elevating your leadership and execution skills, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. It helps the podcast and ensures you never miss an episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Priyanka Shinde Podcast. Today, my guest on the show is Jonathan Shottan. Jonathan is the Chief Product and Content Officer at Tonal. He joined the company in November 2023 to lead the end-to-end product and content strategy and overall transformation of how the product technology will improve the physical well-being of all members. Jonathan brings nearly 2 decades of product and technology management, operations, and data analytics experience at large brands like Facebook and Pinterest, venture capital, and various startups to the executive team. In these roles, he was integral to successfully scaling emerging private companies, driving global growth, and delivering billions in revenue contribution. Jonathan spent the last 5 years at Button, leading mobile commerce platform in this previous role. Jonathan was responsible for all the go-to market and technical operations of the business. Jonathan is a graduate of UCLA. Go Bruins. For those who don't know, Jonathan and I worked together many years ago at a small startup, and I'm incredibly excited to welcome Jonathan to the show. Welcome, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you for having me. You actually made me sound like I've done some really important and exciting things in my career. I appreciate the warm introduction.
Oh, there is a lot there, and it's been almost I feel like 15 odd years or 14
It's
years
been
since.
it's been a while, certainly.
Yeah. Um, I know I gave the introduction, but I always, ask folks to please introduce yourself in your own words and tell us a little bit more about your current role.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm probably the walking embodiment of it's better to be lucky than good. But if I'm good at any one thing, it's choosing kind of the right time and the right place to work on problems that lend themselves to really big outcomes. And more importantly, being really lucky to find myself oftentimes working with people that are passionate about the space, that are significantly more intelligent than me about the space, and using that as a catalyst for my own career growth, but also importantly, to generate impact really broadly. I can go throughout my career, whether it was at Turn, working with folks that have gone on to really amazing, heights in their careers, or across Pinterest and Facebook, now Meta. But importantly, what led me to the Tonal in my most recent role was kind of reflecting on the fact that it seemed like a really good opportunity today to start to work on the translation of the human physiology, the biomechanics, the data collection and aggregation that we're finding kind of through, wearing of these devices or whoops and auras into solutions that resolve themselves to uh, improved outcomes for people. So much of my career, and I've been very lucky, has been about kind of shifting people's attention to these devices or kind of shuttling dollars between one bank account or another. Um, that I felt that it was an important consideration for me to find a company that was working kind of in solving human problems. And Tonal today is really at the forefront of what I think is one of the more important considerations, one of the more universal considerations for people, and that's improvement of strength. Strength isn't just about bigger muscles. Strength is about anything that has to do with your body. The number one predictor nowadays for when an individual is going to need to move into assisted living later on in life is when they can no longer do one body weight squat. How do you know when you can no longer do one body weight squat? Unfortunately, it's when you can no longer stand up off of the toilet once you sit down. And what we're working on here is kind of finding a way to translate so much of that data that we're collecting and aggregating into
Mhm.
positive outcomes. And my role here, as you kind of summarized, really spans kind of the member experience. And so software, product, data science, design on one side of the building, and on the other side of the building, the content experience itself, both the pre-production and the post-production. How do you actually manifest uh, the embedded experience on the device?
Wow, that is really wonderful. And what I loved about what you said is you just put it so simply in getting off the toilet. Like, I mean, for somebody who does like thinks about tonal might be for, a certain type of demographic or things like that. That is an everyday thing. And as you age, nothing changes with that. And it feels really close to heart because I mean, maybe you are seeing this too, but for me, my parents, they're getting older. They're back in India. And we are seeing our parents sort of grow old and not be able to do some of those things. And that kind of goes back to this, like, you need to do strength training. You need to be able to go through your functions every day now in order for like us 25, 30, 40 years later to still have a very mobile lifestyle and not be just sedentary there. And I think that really hits home in terms of the impact of what tonal is trying to do. So thank you for sharing it in such resonating words.
Yeah, no, thanks. And maybe to just dial in on it even more, it, not only is strength universally applicable, it's pretty misunderstood construct. And if you take a look at the last 100 years of literature on fitness, the vast majority of the literature has been focused on and increasingly kind of esoterically narrowed on the implications of improving your cardio fitness, cardiovascular fitness, and the causal linkages to longevity. And it is true, you need to have a strong base of cardio fitness, and it is also true that in doing so, you increase the number of years that you will live on average. That is a universal truth. Um, but what the last five, or really the last 10 years, but importantly, the last 5 years have shown, also in kind of causal, definitive outcomes, is that if you want to live well into the later years of your life, which we now call health span, the number of years that you're living well into those later years, like the number one most important consideration is your strength and maintenance of the strength. And it's both unfair, but also doubly important that this impacts women even more than it impacts men, because of the increased bone density loss that occurs in kind of the perimenopausal and menopausal years. And so we're only just starting to learn about kind of the science behind that, and importantly, kind of the improvements that people can make. But for example, and this is where tonal comes into play. Um, it is proven now that if you lift what is referred to as 60% of your one RM or one rep max, that will trigger the biological imperative to increase your bone density. And for most people, if you go tell them, "Hey, go to the gym and lift at like 60% of your one RM max," they're going to look at you like, "What are you talking about? Like, I don't like. How do I get to that point?" Uh, the cool thing about tonal is with all of the science behind the data that we collect and the you know tens of millions, hundreds of millions of individual reps that are kind of assessed on the product every year, we can put that decision making outside of the member's experience and make that part of the automation process, part of the intelligence function of the product, and hopefully can translate that to many more modalities for many more people.
Yeah, I feel like I think that is the really important part is how like there is so much then data, and for someone who is fortunate enough to have gym machinery in the garage here, and also I
Yeah.
mean I'm a certified group fitness instructor, so I can like I kind of start thinking about the things that they tell us in certification, and a lot of it goes back to some of these things which if somebody is in the fitness world they would know, but it's not necessarily common knowledge. But at the same time, for me, like noting down all my reps and how many weights I did and all of that, it's just like I would rather just go in, exercise, get back out, and but now Tonal would capture all of that data, and then there's so much customization that can happen after that. So we'll talk, excuse me, a lot more about that. But you mentioned that there was a lot of luck involved in your career, but is there a pivotal moment or a decision that you can share that significantly shaped your career itself, or maybe
Yeah.
how you operate as a leader?
Yeah. Maybe I'll try to answer both of those. So I studied um, philosophy and mathematics and in my university time, and I joined the Peace Corps. Actually, I went to a small country called the Gambia in West Africa, and I never set out to be a product manager. I never really kind of planned on a career in product management. When I came back, I was a little bit lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was, trying to figure out if I was going to go back to school and study something. Am I going to be a lawyer? I don't know. Like I was really, really lost. But I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in a city called Sunnyvale. My dad is an engineer. Most of my friends were kind of students in computer science and had landed at, various companies in the Bay Area. And this was right around 2005, and companies were hiring pretty aggressively, and I got a role at a company at the time, high flying startup called Nextag. It did comparison shopping, and this I wasn't hired as a product manager. I was hired at the time in a role called marketing analyst. The role itself was really, in today's parlance, would be growth PM. It was analyzing landing pages, making assessments on how to improve conversion rates, translating that into member value, working with designers, working with engineers, and kind of pushing that forward. Um, I moved from that company to a company called Sidestep. Sidestep was the first travel meta search engine. So if you're familiar at all with Kayak or companies like that, and I got a chance to work for what was, turned into the first real mentor I had in my career. His name was Svetlazar Kazanjiev, and he really kind of took me in and helped train me from an analytics perspective. At my role at that company, again, not product, was really a reflection. Again, likely would be growth product today. Was about how to build systems around performance marketing. How do you automate systems? How do you translate that to better financial outcomes? And so I got a lot of really good training at both of those companies in terms of how to think rigorously and analytically with a member value perspective, but importantly, and this is kind of a translation or a through line for a lot of my career, with a lens on data and an application on kind of like data and the importance of kind of quantification of output. or outcomes rather. And that company was bought. I got like an early kind of like, oh, companies just get bought and it's awesome. And like there's great outcomes kind of moment in time. Now, this is where it kind of jumps into I got really lucky. The chairman of the board of Sidestep was a man by the name of Jim Barnett. Jim Barnett was the founder of Turn, and he was close at the time with Svetlazar. He asked Svetlazar to come join him at Turn, which was at the time a very small, brand new company. And Svetlazar in turn said, like, "Hey, why don't you come join me? And we'll start a team together." And the team doesn't really have an exact remit, and the team doesn't have an exact kind of goal in mind, but we'll be responsible for kind of bridging a lot of gaps. And I was young. I was in my 20s. I didn't know. Like in retrospect, I probably wouldn't have done something like that again with all the things I know today. But what it translated into was as that company grew, the importance of the role kind of grew. And there were a lot of really just critically smart people at this company, and I was constantly being pushed to improve. And Svelazar eventually left, and he was very entrepreneurial, and he started his own business. But I was kind of lost in the company a little bit. I was not a product manager. I was not an engineer. I was not in marketing. I was just kind of this like catch-all guy, and that's where I kind of found another mentor in my career. This man by the name of Matt Westover, and Matt at the time was leading the product function, and he took a shot, like, or he took a risk in kind of like letting me kind of grow into the role and translating much of what I had done in my prior career from an orientation perspective into a true product manager. Role and working alongside, again, those critically smart people. And I'll mention them by name: Emil Litvak, Vishal Shah, Dominic Bennett, like people that were real, Song Ting Chen, like all have gone on to do like really amazing, wonderful things in their career. Like really helped shape who I was. And that was kind of the most pivotal moment in my early career that, I took some of these early foundations in various roles, and because of chance and because of great mentorship, I was able to translate that into a role that shaped the rest of my career.
Yeah. Oh, that I mean, there's so much. One, we share a little bit of common history there, and
Yeah,
Sean
yeah.
definitely was similar for me. It was a little bit mid-career, not early for me, but
Mhm.
really when I moved to the Bay Area, that is where I came in, and it was really, really amazing to work with. I mean, incredibly smart people, all of you, but there was so much everything. There was like I feel like the environment that was there at Turn, I haven't, even though I've gone to other places, I haven't had that. And I know me and a lot of the other folks you named joined Facebook after you left, probably. And we used to like try and do these meetups, like Turn meetups. um,
Yeah,
it was
it's
really
it's
great.
crazy. If you think about the talent density that came out of Turn and what it's translated to, I would put it up with pretty much any company of its size out there in terms of what that's manifested in
Yeah.
terms of just scale of management experience
Mhm.
across technology as a whole, as a landscape.
Yeah. And there's so much that when you are a little bit sort of early in your career, you take from all of these people, and that goes on to
Hmm.
also sort of build your own way of looking at things, be it leadership,
Yeah,
be it execution, be it
yeah,
product. I really resonate with that. And one of the things you said is like you worked at these really small companies. You didn't really know what the role
yeah.
was, but then you also went on to work at larger companies. So, what
Hmm.
has been the biggest difference that you have seen in when leading product teams in these different environments?
The burden of communication, I think, is the big distinction. Where when you're in a really small environment, you can jump into a conversation with two to three people, arrive at an outcome, and then push through delivery. And often if you are a PM that has grown up in a small environment, singularly small environment in terms of your career, you will struggle to adapt at a big environment because the burden of communication, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, increases, somewhat exponentially. And the degree to which you need to be attenuated to understanding other people's motivations within an organization. And I'm not saying like you have to play politics, but what I am saying is that when you are in a multifaceted organization where people are at a base level compensated on different outcomes, but importantly, understand business objectives somewhat differently, your role as a PM in part becomes the synthesizer of a project to achieve everybody's individual outcomes kind of equitably, and the ability not to end up with a turducken of a product that does nothing for nobody. And that's the big difference that I've seen in my career. And to be honest, it's something that I don't particularly love. And so like I just keep going back into smaller companies once companies get too big because I don't really put up with that very well. It's just not something that I'm particularly excited by on a day-to-day basis.
There is a charm to a smaller setup for sure. I
Mhm,
feel like
mhm,
I find that a little bit myself as well.
mhm.
It was really interesting at Facebook. I mean, you get a lot of different experience and you get to deal with the scale of things. Um, and then there's the charm to like doing something that is like a little bit 0 to 1 early, like a lot of ambiguity.
Yeah,
I'm sensing that coming out of his like there may not be ambiguity with the communication, but then there's ambiguity with the product, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. But look, there's a value in working specifically in product or really any role at, a company like Meta at scale, or Pinterest, or really any other company that's achieved kind of breakout scale. And that's kind of multifold or multifactorial. Like one, your impact is big. Even if you're working on something small, like you can tend to have kind of broad impact. And I'm talking on kind of a human basis. Like you tend to see either like lots of people impacted by the work that you're doing, or from a dollar amount, if you're working in kind of a monetization function or a growth function, like it's pretty exciting to see things at scale, and that's translatable down the stack. And that's not always true when you're working on something with small scale to understand how to do something kind of large. And when you do something large, you often have, great metrics accountability, you have great infrastructure, you have great tooling, and those learnings can be translatable again when you go into smaller environments. I also think increasing the burden of communication on a product manager is important. I think that the product managers that break out fastest from kind of an IC track into a management and then even like a GM type role in their career are the ones that can shape a narrative to the audience that they're talking about better than other people, and shift altitude up and down throughout the day. So on any given day, they may be spending their time in the morning looking at, diffs, or looking at designs, or looking at, problems in a queue, whereas in the afternoon they may be, talking about, product marketing narrative, and how to achieve kind of market resonance. Also importantly, they can put into specific words in a way that an executive will understand an outcome, but importantly, translate that back to how an engineer understands specific outcomes, and the imperatives behind the work that's being done. And that's not a universal skill. It's something that you have to learn, you have to grow, you have to adapt behind. And big environments, larger organizations really test product folks to either get good at that or kind of they get leveled pretty quickly.
Yeah. Uh, I think you talk about the importance of narrative and storytelling for product
Mhm.
managers. And you're really, I think, for someone who has worked in a B2C and a B2B environment, like you've worked both types of like customer segments. So there is the engineer and then there's the business, but there's also like these different audiences. And can you elaborate a little bit on like how do you see the differences, or how do you adapt for your growth and product strategy based on these different customer segments?
Yeah, that's a big question. I don't know that I have a very concise answer. I'll do my best. I think just the underlying truth for me is that consumer is way easier than
Mhm.
than B2B. Uh, at least from a kind of pure what do we build and why perspective. The the realities are that there's a lot more tolerated failure in consumer. The number of things that don't work are tremendous. And to the extent that you're a well funded organization, you have an ability to kind of iterate in perpetuity to find points of value on top of which you can grow. Conversely, from a B2B side, if you build yourself into a corner or outside of the need space of a particular market, you'll die pretty quickly. It's there's not much failure that's tolerated, and so the burden on decision making
Mhm.
and rationalization of bets from a B2B side is much heavier. I do think within consumer organizations, the PMs that work on monetization functions, the PMs that work on commerce functions, the PMs that work in growth, uh, often fall closer in line actually to um, to the B2B PMs. And you will actually see in large organizations those PMs that tend to rise to big GM type
Yeah.
functions. I've had experiences in one of growth or monetization because they can think about business outcomes intuitively, and they're trained on business outcomes because of the nature of their work. But that's the big difference, like,
Mhm.
just that it's that burden of failure, or the allowance of failure is much higher on the consumer side. Um, that's one big primary distinction. Does
Mhm.
that make sense?
Yes, yes. And feels like because there's that tolerance on the consumer side, would you say there is a little bit more room for experimentation?
There's certainly a lot more room for experimentation. There's certainly a lot more tolerance for um, new ideas that are meant to kind of facilitate engagement or growth, depending on the environment in which you're working on. Um, from a B2B perspective, y- you're often, I think it's quite true that there's a pretty big power law distribution on revenue curves for most businesses. Most businesses probably have, 10 to 20% of their total clients making up 60 to 80% of their revenue. And then there's a long tail. When you're in a consumer world and all of that's coming in via either subscription or monetization, it's slightly different
Right.
through ads. But if you're a B2B player, and especially if you're in your first 3 to 5 years of kind of go to market and you don't have huge scale just yet, you're kind of within a box. You're developing to the needs of your buyers
Mhm.
on the presumption that it will grow uh their net revenue,
Right.
and increase your net revenue retention, and importantly, making bets on the adjacencies that you can increase your TAM. But if you throw a spear out into the middle of the ocean and hope to catch a fish, and you fail, you will have lost your spear, like extending that metaphor in a weird way, and also not caught a fish most often, and then you'll be in a lot of trouble.
Right, right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really a interesting way to look at it. Um, Talking about consumer, so you're back at Tonal, which I would think
Mhm.
is a mix of consumer and
It's all it's all
consumer.
consumer right now. Yeah, it's all consumer.
Is this the first time you're working with a product that is hardware and software? right? And so how do you,
It is, yeah.
yeah, how do you see, like, what has prepared you to take something on, or like what do you see now that is different, that is new, when you're dealing with a product that is hardware and software combined?
Yeah. Yeah, having spent the vast majority of my career working in software spaces, there's never been a true fixed constraint. Um, it like, yeah, maybe you can't spend more money, but that's a business decision. And yeah, maybe you can't hire more people, but that's a business decision. The reality is like there was no law of physics that said like you can't scale, machines, or you can't scale compute, or you can't like benefit from the latest and greatest in software innovation. Um, Conversely, in hardware, there's a real fixed constraint. And the fixed constraint is basically whatever you have in your product that you've developed and built, like that's a fixed constraint. And there's nothing that you can do to go backwards to fix that or improve it. So if you have an idea, and hypothetically, let's say your idea is you want to make on Tonal a better computer vision
Mhm.
product and use the camera on the machine to like improve an outcome for our user base. Well, if the camera is only of a fixed quality and the compute power of the machine is only at a fixed level and the power is only at like blah, 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 like you may never be able to achieve that. And so having to think in years of kind of forward looking fixed constraints versus never having to think about that at all is the biggest change for me.
Yeah, that is definitely was something that when I went into hardware software as well at Meta, and then of course with Cruise, the car is the whole hardware. Um, you're thinking 2, 3, 4 years ahead,
Yeah.
and what you
Yeah.
decide today for hardware decisions also impacts your software so much. And then sometimes there is, like you said, there's no going back on it. So every decision becomes a little bit critical as opposed to a software only. So
Mm.
that definitely takes adjusting. And Tonal just launched the Tonal 2. So congratulations on that. As well as
Thank
the
you.
Tonal training lab. So can you share a little bit more about, what went into the development of this? You probably have been working on this from 2, 3 years,
Yeah.
maybe. Um, and what really makes it unique?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me maybe start kind of by explaining Tonal a little bit for anybody that might not know. Tonal is a gym. It fits on your wall. It's built around a digital weight system. It allows for up to right around 300 different moves with arms that articulate in three directions, upper body, lower body. It's built on an intelligence engine. Today, you'd call it AI. A lot of reinforcement learning, machine learning. Uh, but really, it's a full body gym that like the more you use it, the smarter it gets. And on the inside of the gym, on the inside of the tonal unit, there's a magnetic resistance motor, and it's not dissimilar from what you would find in an electric vehicle. Um, it spins in two directions. It creates, tension profiles. And instead of spinning on an axle and kind of propelling wheels forward and backwards, what it does is it has a pulley system and it creates these tension profiles on cables when you pull them back and forth, pull and retract them. 50 times a second on a 50 hertz refresh rate, we're collecting effectively force and velocity with a whole bunch of gyroscopic kind of elements that allow us to understand place in space plus force and velocity as basically a function of what it takes to achieve certain strength outcomes. And over the last 5 years of kind of being at scale and market, we believe we've aggregated, the world's largest biomechanical or physiological data set on human strength. Now, why do I start there? I start there because with that data set, we believe that the company has a pretty, compelling and, uh, ambitious opportunity to create value in a whole bunch of different environments. And so we launched the Tonal 2. Tonal 2 is an improvement on Tonal 1 in that it has a much better weight profile, much improved camera dynamics that allow for multimodal kind of feedback for user computer vision, plus cables. It has new weight mechanics like this cardio mode we call Aero, which is this new kind of resistance profile that we built on top of a better engine, and a bunch of software experiences that we have yet to release that will continue to improve it. But that puts us in a position where, you brought up the Tonal Training Lab. We we can push our product into environments that allow us to kind of achieve outcomes that we may not have been able to achieve very well in the past. And so, like, one of them is, hey, we're trying to kind of understand, like, can we do something from a boutique fitness perspective? So the Tonal Training Lab is an interesting way to kind of meld this new cardio plus resistance training to see what kind of member experience we can create on top of that. Importantly, we're also thinking, further afield from a healthcare perspective. With all of this data that we're collecting and aggregating, could we in turn translate that to value from a physical therapy perspective?
Mm.
Today, if you've ever had the misfortune of going in to do any sort of physical therapy, not to pass judgment on the entire sector, but it's kind of, frozen in time. It's, somebody with a clipboard looking at you kind of doing, squats and assessing kind of the depth to which you're squatting with their eyes, or watching you pull on resistance bands or kettlebells or dumbbells. And the reality is that it doesn't comport to kind of all of this quantified self data that we're collecting in the real world today. And we believe that there's a space for us to play there and translate that. And I'm maybe not answering your question directly, but what we're learning in kind of short order is that our product and the value that we're creating has pretty wide berth to play in.
Yeah. There's so much potential. You talk about physical therapy and looking at it from a healthcare perspective. But really, all of that data can really help you provide so much more personalized support. And I feel like unless you hire a one on one personalized trainer or personal trainer, or have even on the
Mhm.
therapy and things like that, it's hard to get that same input. Plus, even if they have the data, they aren't doing anything with that data itself.
Mhm.
So I feel like the
Mhm.
the level of personalization definitely can really help folks. And so as you think about the future, one is like there was probably, it was not easy to bring Tonal 2 to the market. And so how do you tackle challenges, and how do you see that going forward in order to fulfill the vision of the company in the next 5-10 years?
We're actually going through the long range planning exercises now. It's really about stacking growth curves for us as a business. There's no secret that connected fitness as a space uh, benefited and then was also tremendously impacted by COVID.
Mm.
When everything got locked down, um, people bought Pelotons and tonals and everything else, two at a time. Like, I'll put one, I'll stack them on top of each other. And these companies grew super fast, both in terms of their member base, but also in terms of, the company footprint itself. And when, COVID lockdowns ended and people kind of, started federating back into, the meat space, or IRL, as my kids would say. Uh, like, it created challenges for these companies, not because the products weren't useful anymore, but because they overextended themselves in terms of the amount of inventory they bought, in terms of the expectations on marketing and customer acquisition costs, and a whole
Mhm.
host of things that would take 7 podcasts to get through. Uh, all of that being said, Tonal I can't speak for Peloton, but Tonal is in a very kind of secure space right now. We were smaller than Peloton, still smaller than Peloton, but didn't extend ourselves as far and have been able to course correct. And with Tonal 2, we're now charting a path forward. As we think about the future, like for me, importantly, like it's it's really built on kind of a set of sequenced events.
Mhm.
Like one, we need to ensure that we constantly maintain a lead on our hardware. We're always going to be in part, a hardware company, and uh, that means we've got to be thinking 2 3 year cycles always, and the next cycle has to basically present an opportunity to meet the market again with a product that's 10x better than everything else that's out there. And so it takes a lot of kind of effort to get to that point, and we're thinking through that now. The market won't see that value for years, but we've got to start thinking about it, yesterday. um, Two, how do you build on the current user base itself, the current member base, to generate more engagement from them to maintain uh, um, um, a high NPS and a high kind of propensity not to churn, to maintain on the product. And so
Right.
that means, like, what are the quality of life improvements? What are the improvements that we can do through software and potentially adjacent content and accessory
Right.
value to deliver for them? And then there are, similar to what I was just talking about with healthcare, opportunities to grow the TAM.
Mhm.
And that's where the bets become hard, because we kind of fit now into a world, if we go back to the conversation, of B2B, where making
Yeah.
investments here take a tremendous amount of conviction, because if you build it and it's the wrong thing, it doesn't mean that you're going to generate a business value proposition. And so we have to be, uh, on the one hand, attenuated from a consumer perspective and building consumer product for our member base with an expectation that we're not going to get everything right, but that's okay, because we're going to push stuff out continuously and fast. But on the other hand, we've got to be extremely convicted when we're now trying to approach kind of what the B2B modalities of the business are, uh, and try to land one or two bets every year that help us kind of graduate beyond where we are as a business now and stack growth curves.
Mhm. Yeah, I when you started talking about healthcare and things like that, there is again a lot of opportunity, but with something that can like tech evolves so rapidly. But for example,
Mhm.
if there is a business and it is probably not going to replace something as huge. It's not like a watch or a phone that you might replace
No,
every year or other
no.
year. So really trying to get that right, and you almost like walking this fine line and balancing that in terms of innovation at scale versus providing the value, which
Mhm.
I'm sure is not easy as you do your long range planning.
Yeah, luckily I've got like an amazing team, and there's no shortage of convicted individuals here. And so, like, my job is in large part to help synthesize a lot of it, but I'm feeling pretty lucky, and I think we have a huge opportunity here as a business.
Yeah. Oh, that brings me to a point is like you do have a cross functional, multidisciplinary team. How do you go
Mhm.
about leading such a team with this type of a product?
Yeah, like every week I'm trying to like improve how I'm doing it. There's no one kind of pithy answer other than a large maintain a lot of communication throughput. And so I meet with my leads weekly on Monday mornings, and we make that a discussion really built around two primary topics. One, what's top of mind for me, and it gives my team an opportunity to understand kind of how I'm thinking about the week or the bigger opportunities. I use a lot of that to kind of reflect. Here are conversations that I'm having with the board, or here are conversations that we're having on anything from potential M&A to fundraising, right? Like, just to make sure that there's clarity and an ability for all of them to understand kind of where I'm focused. Because sometimes that spins people up, but other times it just helps people kind of feel secure in the work that they're doing, and that's important. And then two, I use it as an opportunity to elevate uh, any decisions or potential misalignments that exist across my org or interdepartmentally into other orgs, and we spend a good percentage of the meetings discussing work streams that either aren't going as fast as they should be or are reflective of misalignments organizationally, which you could have misalignments and still move fast, and it's important to like solve them, or you may be stuck, and when you're elevating it to me, I tend to operate with kind of uh, not a scalpel approach, and so what you end up getting is like kind of you're bringing it to me like it's going to end up in some thrash, but basically I use this as an opportunity to kind of drive clarity, and I operate as a catalyst.
Mhm.
So like if you're bringing it to me, it's because you want to move faster or you're stuck somehow.
Right.
And then my teams all tend to operate um, in concert with each other. And so a lot of my leads meet with each other independently. A lot of them have teams that kind of meet, in sequence one with another. And then we also have a pretty well established program management function. And we're thinking through kind of how we evolve that. But for the big primary initiatives of the company, it's actually removed from any one executive's purview in a sense and kind of translated into a base truth, and we review those as an executive team
Mhm.
through the lens of program management every couple of weeks for every big initiative.
Right, right. It's really trying to like pull all of it's everything from talking about things that might be
Yeah,
just coming in terms of
yeah,
trends and things to then down to
yeah,
um, hardcore execution. Um,
yeah,
when we think about trends and things like that, obviously there is a lot about like talk about hype about AI and all of that, and I'm sure
yeah,
like there has been
yeah,
discussions in your teams about that as
yeah,
well. And sometimes I hear this
yeah,
in organizations there isn't necessarily alignment on like what do we do. So AI was a big thing over
yeah,
the last 2 years, and then now I think AI agents is becoming another big
yeah.
terminology. So one is like just what was your reaction with all of these AI terms being kind of like hyped around, and how do you see that as maybe just shaping the future in the industry itself?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a pretty circumspect individual, so like, if you were to ask me this question a couple years ago, I'd be like, much ado about nothing. But being a user of the technology, it's it's mind-boggling. I don't think there's a day that goes by where I'm not, invested in some output of today's LLM infrastructure. Whether that's using Perplexity for, deeper research or whether that's now kind of testing some of the new models that are coming out. I think, from a product and a research perspective, if you know how to prompt efficiently, like you can amplify your impact tremendously. And um, my hope is that it doesn't replace all of us, but rather turbocharges our impact. And I don't think it's overblown. I don't think there's any hyperbole in terms of how these new experiences are going to shape the kind of work that we do, whether
Mhm.
it's kind of synthesis and analysis or whether it's 0 to 1 ideas. There are some um, pretty compelling tools out there that really support a much improved impact value for many people.
Yeah, yeah. Is there like a specific way as an executive team that you think
Yeah.
about everything that's coming out?
Yes and no. Because like everything that's coming out, like would explode your head if you thought about everything. Like, but it- I'll talk about it from the perspective of building the next generation of hardware.
Mhm.
Um, if I put my consumer hat on and I was buying a hardware device that cost several $1,000s, and it modeled itself an AI device, an intelligent device, and this device was, shipping in 2 years from now. My expectation as a consumer, putting the lens of kind of 2 years into the future on, is that I can walk up to it and talk to it, and this thing is going to talk back to me, and it's going to understand me, and it's going to be personalized to me, even in a multi-user household, based off of anything from voice recognition to digital signatures or image signatures, and that this underlying consumer shift to what it is that the expectations of the consumer are going to be in a couple of years is really kind of behind my push to think through what our hardware experience from an AI perspective needs to
Mhm.
look like. And so we're doing that from a build perspective. Admittedly, we've been slow as a business internally to really think through how AI collectively turbocharges our impact. Um, our head of engineering is working with her team to figure out how things like Copilot can kind of improve, output. But generally speaking, there's still a lot more to learn and do, and it's seemingly every week there's a new thing. So I don't think we're in a position to make any decisions just yet. We're still learning.
Yeah, I mean that's the challenge with like in the hardware software world. Like software, oh, we just put AI everywhere and like it
Yeah,
shows up. Um,
yeah.
and then there is the. I think you touch upon a very important point: is consumers' expectations of AI have changed. So no longer are they going to like I'm sure over the past few years when people were using all of these voice assistants and they would like repeatedly say the same thing and the voice assistant would understand, they would tolerate that, but I feel like that is going to go away. And so you really need to be on top of how the product shapes up if you're putting
Hmm.
AI into it.
Hmm.
So that
Yeah.
makes, I guess, a responsibility higher on you or whoever is building products with AI, is that you cannot just treat the consumer in a certain way. Now they're like super smart and they know more about this. Um,
I think the consumer that we're going for, at least with the current product set that costs, $4,000 or so, like the expectations are high. The burden on the team is high as well here internally.
yeah. Oh, wonderful. As we sort of get towards the end of this, I like to ask a couple of questions to everybody. So, the first one here is again a term that has been going viral or getting popular is founder mode. And as someone who
Hmm.
has worked very closely with startup founders and scale teams
Hmm.
and even operated in larger companies, what do you think sets apart founders from everybody else?
Identity, in a single word. Founders' identity, it carries over from self and what they see into the mirror to the companies that they build and how they objectively view their whole life
Mhm.
through the lens of success or failure of that product or that company or the vision that they've set. Um, and I think it's unfair to express that same level of identity kind of shift to employees. But I do think it's fair to take the construct of that identity, which I think is ownership, and express that to employees, which is to say, when you're working for a smaller company and the work that you're doing has potential implications to a true output of the business or outcome of the business, you should feel ownership and agency over the work that you're doing. And because of that sense of ownership, you shouldn't be satisfied with doing just an okay job. And I think when people talk about founders mode, like that there isn't a clear delineation between that identity and what it means to wake up in a panic at 2 in the morning because you think you fucked up on an email that you sent, to like just ensuring that you're giving it your all when you show up to work every day. And I think that's the best translation of founder mode to employees at large. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that. I think you, like you said, identity, but really it goes down to how the founder, the company is, I guess, the found extension for the founder of their own self.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
how do you help everybody sort of
Yeah.
adopt that DNA a little bit
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
work with you, or like make the company
I think the way you do it best is by giving people agency over
yeah,
decisions and an understanding of impact.
yeah,
And if people can see that they're in charge of their own impact, then they will take ownership.
yeah. I
And if
think
they see that they can't, they will not.
Yeah, I think that's a really great leadership lesson in there, in terms of how founders, as they scale their company, should think about
Uh,
um, the culture of their company. But I'm sure, like,
yeah,
if we talk about that, that will be another episode. So to
certainly.
come to my last question, um, because I talk about strategy, execution, leadership, I like to ask this is, and for someone like you who has worked in all of these areas, if I gave you $100 to divide between strategy, execution, and leadership, how would you allocate it and why?
Uh, strategy, like right off the cuff, because like we have like 2 minutes here. Strategy, I'd put $40. Leadership, I'd put $40. And execution, I'd put $20. And why? So without strategy, you really don't have anything, and strategy is what helps people move fast. When you have clear strategy, you have clear goals, and when you have clear goals, you can delegate that agency and that ownership we just talked about. Leadership, why leadership? uh, Leadership is what allows people to move fast because of the creation of very clear swim lanes, the creation of accountability, and the creation of cross functional alignment. When you have clear leadership, you can run through milestones quickly because you don't have to worry about misalignments at check-ins. You don't have to worry about misalignments between departments. You can ensure that people are being, on the soft skills part of things, mentored, coached, compensated proactively to deliver their best. Execution, I'd give it a million if I could, but like the reality is if you've got really clear strategy and really good leadership, you can arrive at a point where you're going to get the best out of the execution that you possibly can, without needing to kind of revisit processes and
Mhm.
revisit systems because people know what they have to do.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. That was really great. Thank you so much for being on the
Yeah.
show and sharing all of the wisdom. A lot of great product and leadership lessons in there. It was wonderful to have you. If today's conversation sparked new ideas or challenged your perspective, I'd love to hear from you. I work with tech leaders and founders to tackle complex challenges, whether it's scaling teams, making high stakes decisions, or turning ambitious ideas into reality. If that sounds like something you are navigating, let's connect. Reach out via my website, thepriyankashinde.com, or find me on LinkedIn.